The sky over the whispering woods had turned the colour of a bruised plum, heavy and low, pressing down on the canopy with a weight that only the forest dwellers could truly feel. Leo the fox stood atop the highest ridge of the great quarry, his orange fur standing out like a spark against the deepening grey. The air had changed. The humid, heavy scent of damp earth and rotting leaves had been replaced by a sharp, metallic bite that stung the back of his throat. It was the scent of the north. High above, the clockwork owl perched on a jagged branch of the lightning-struck oak. Its ruby heart pulsed with a frantic, rapid rhythm, a warning light in the gloom. The owl's glass eyes were fixed on a single, swirling speck descending from the clouds. It was not like the rain, and it was not like the mist. It was the first snowflake of the year. The flake did not fall like the others would. It drifted with a purpose, catching the amber light of the owl's gaze. As it neared the ground, it glided toward Leo, landing with impossible lightness directly upon his black-tipped nose. In that instant, Leo did not feel cold. He felt a vibration. It was a silent hum that echoed through his bones, a message written in the geometry of ice. The snowflake told of a storm unlike any the woods had seen in a decade, a great freeze that would lock the rivers in glass and bury the hollows in white silence before the moon reached its zenith. The message of winter was clear. The forest was not ready. The transition from the golden warmth to the silver bite had been too swift. Leo looked up at the clockwork owl. The mechanical bird understood. It let out a long, haunting chime that echoed across the valley, a signal for Leo to begin his journey. The fox turned and bolted into the thicket, his paws barely touching the moss. He had to reach the great sleepers before the sky broke open. His first stop was the ancient root, a massive cedar with a great bear. Silas had already begun his long slumber. Leo reached the entrance of the cave and found it only half banked with leaves. The bear's breathing was slow and heavy, a deep rumble that shook the small stones on the floor. Leo did not bark or yell. Instead, he used his muzzle to shove the heavy, damp mounds of earth and pine needles into the mouth of the den, sealing the gap against the coming wind. He scratched a jagged mark in the dirt, a symbol the owl had taught him to warn any passing creature that this door must remain shut. The wind began to moan through the trees, stripping the last of the brittle leaves from the branches. Leo's next destination was the deep marsh, where the turtles and frogs were settling into the mud. The water was already skinning over with a thin, fragile layer of ice. Leo ran along the banks, his tail acting as a rudder as he leaped over fallen logs. He found the elders of the pond still lingering near the surface, confused by the sudden drop in temperature. Leo waded into the freezing shallows. He began to splash the water, breaking the ice crust and nudging the lingering turtles toward the soft, insulated silt of the deep bottom. He moved with a frantic energy, his fur becoming matted with ice crystals. He stayed until the last shell had vanished beneath the mud, safe from the solid freeze that would soon turn the pond into a tomb of ice. By the time Leo reached the heart of the woods, the sky had begun to shed its white burden in earnest. The small flakes were no longer messengers. They were the vanguard of the storm. The clockwork owl soared overhead, its copper wings cutting through the wind, its ruby light acting as a beacon for the fox to follow. They reached the colony of the sleepy mice in the hollowed-out log near the creek. The mice had gathered plenty of seeds, but they had built their nest too low, where the rising snow would surely suffocate them. Leo nudged the log with his shoulder, groaning under the weight, until he managed to tilt it upward against the sturdy trunk of a sprawling oak. The entrance was now high above the ground, safe from the drifting white walls that were already beginning to form. Leo's breath came in ragged, white clouds. His legs felt heavy, and the cold was beginning to seep past his thick winter coat into his skin. But the message was not yet fully delivered. He pushed onward toward the high burrows of the badgers. The wind had become a howling wall of white. Visibility was gone. Leo could no longer see the trees, only the faint, pulsing red glow of the clockwork owl above him. He followed that light blindly, trusting the machine's precision over his own faltering senses. The owl dropped lower, its metallic talons clicking against the icy bark of the trees, guiding the fox through the labyrinth of the storm. Finally, they reached the high burrows. Leo found the badgers struggling to drag a final cache of roots into their tunnel. The snow was drifting fast, threatening to bury their entrance before they could secure it. Leo joined them, his small frame wedging behind the heavy roots, pushing with all the strength left in his tired muscles. With a final, collective heave, the cache moved inside, and the badgers tumbled into the warmth of the earth. The fox stood alone in the white chaos. His task was finished. The message of winter had been delivered, and the sleepers were safe. But Leo was far from his own home. He looked up, searching for the owl, but the red light was obscured by a sudden, violent gust of snow. Leo curled into a tight ball at the base of a great pine, tucking his nose under his tail to trap the last of his warmth. He felt the cold encroaching, a heavy sleepiness pulling at his eyelids. Then he heard the familiar click or click of gears. The clockwork owl landed beside him. It did not offer to share, but its ruby heart was generating a steady, mechanical heat. The bird expanded its copper wings, creating a small, metallic tent over the fox. A heat from the ruby glass radiated outward, pushing back the frost. The serpent, too, appeared from the snow, its silver body having tunneled through the drifts. It coiled itself in a tight circle around Leo and the owl, its sapphire eye glowing with a protective blue light. The friction of its moving segments created a warm friction that thawed the ice from Leo's fur. Safe within the circle of his mechanical friends, Leo finally let his eyes close. The storm roared outside, a monster of wind and ice. But inside the small hollow, there was only the steady ticking of a clockwork heart and the soft breathing of a fox. The next morning, the forest awoke to a world of silent, sparkling white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a kingdom of crystal. Leo emerged from the snow, followed by the owl and the serpent. He looked out over the woods and knew that beneath the drifts, the sleepers were dreaming of spring, all because he had listened to the secret carried by a single snowflake. Leo sat on his haunches, the cold air crisp and clean in his lungs. He looked at his companions, the copper bird and the silver snake, and realized that while nature provided the life, it was his strange, different friends who had provided the strength to preserve it. The transition from the great freeze to the thaw began not with a roar, but with a single, musical drip. The ice that had held the whispering woods in a diamond-hard grip started to soften, turning from translucent glass to a porous, milky white. Leo the fox was the first to sense the change. From the safety of the limestone grotto, he watched as the sunlight, now pale gold instead of winter silver, began to eat away at the edges of the drifts. Beside him, the clockwork owl let out a series of melodic pings, its internal barometer sensing the rise in pressure. Its copper wings shivered, shedding the last of the seasonal oxidation. The serpent uncoiled from its sandy trench, its silver scales reflecting the dancing light of the melting icicles at the cave's mouth. They had survived the white silence and now it was time for the forest to wake. Leo led the way out of the sanctuary. The world was loud with the sound of rushing water. Every creek had become a torrent, and every hillside was a waterfall. As Leo moved through the slush, he revisited the places where he had laboured during the storm. He wanted to be there when the sleepers opened their eyes, not for thanks, but to ensure the transition back to the world of the living was a gentle one. They reached the ancient root first. The heavy bank of earth Leo had piled against the opening was now a mound of soft mud. Inside, a great, rhythmic thumping signalled that Sealers the bear was stirring. Leo used his paw to clear the debris, opening the passage to the warm spring air. As the massive bear stepped out, blinking against the unaccustomed brightness, he found a gift waiting on a flat stone. Leo had scavenged a cache of dried honeycomb and fatty nuts, preserved in a hollow gourd, to provide the bear with the immediate energy his depleted body craved. The bear rumbled a low vibration of gratitude, his heavy paws treading softly on the thawing moss. At the deep marsh, the ice had vanished, leaving the water clear and dark. Leo and the serpent worked together at the shoreline. The serpent dived into the depths, using its sapphire eye to locate the turtles still buried in the silt. It nudged them upward with its silver nose, guiding them toward the shallows where the sun hit the water most directly. Leo waited on the bank, pulling away the tangled weeds that blocked their path to the sun-warmed rocks. By midday, a dozen turtles sat in a row, their shells soaking up the heat, their ancient eyes watching the fox and the mechanical snake with a quiet, knowing respect. The journey continued to the colony of the sleepy mice. The log Leo had tilted upward was now surrounded by a carpet of early snowdrops, their white bells nodding in the breeze. The mice emerged in a tiny, grey wave, sniffing the air with frantic whiskers. They found that Leo had not only kept them dry, but had left a trail of dried berries and grain leading to the nearest budding berry bush. The owl hovered above, dropping small bits of bright copper wire it had found in the explorer's old Kit Perfect, sturdy frames for the mice to weave into their new spring nest to protect them from the damp. Finally, they climbed the high burrows of the badgers. The earth here was still stubborn and cold, but the sun was doing its work. The badgers emerged, lean and hungry, their black and white faces masked with the dust of their long sleep. They found the heavy roots Leo had helped them store were still intact. But more importantly, they found that the entrance to their home had been reinforced with flat stones, preventing the spring floods from washing away their tunnels. As the sun began to set on the first true day of spring, the Whispering Woods felt different than it ever had before. It was no longer a place of separate lives, but a tapestry of interconnected stories. The animals of the forest, usually wary and distant, shared a common thread of survival that led back to the orange fox and his companions of metal and glass. Leo returned to the great ridge, his heart full. He sat between the owl and the serpent, watching the first fireflies of the season begin their rhythmic dance in the valley below. He looked at the mechanical bird, whose ruby heart ticked in perfect time with the dripping of the meltwater. He looked at the serpent, whose sapphire eye mirrored the rising stars. He understood now that the message of winter had not just been a warning of a storm, but a lesson in the beauty of the unexpected. The forest had been saved by things that did not eat, did not breathe, and did not grow from the earth, yet they were as much a part of the woods as the trees themselves. The three of them sat in the gathering dusk, a fox of fur, a bird of copper, and a snake of silver, watching the world turn green again. The balance had been restored. and the secret of the snowflake was now a memory of warmth in a world that was ready to bloom.